Hey guys, MoiDawg here, and today we're going to be going over Squad 8.0, the latest update to the game, which has added a bunch of new combat units, new modernized vehicles, new weapon emplacements, and a lot more. V8.0 is huge, so in this video, we're going to be going over all the patch notes to make sure you know everything that's been added or changed. But before we do that, today's video is sponsored by me. If you like my content and would like to support the channel further, do consider checking out my Patreon. I post additional exclusive content there, chat about upcoming videos, and more, all for the price of a cup of coffee. It's not required, it's not expected, and I'll still post all of my videos for y'all free here on YouTube, but do consider it if you do like the channel and want to support a bit more. Thank you so much for my current Patreons, but that's enough of that. Let's get into the patch. We've had units in Squad for a few months now with map voting, and in Squad 8.0, we'll be getting even more variety to choose from thanks to a bunch of new and exciting vehicles. For the US Army, we'll be getting a whole new fleet of APCs, the M113A3s. The M113A3 is an iconic piece of America's Army, and it will have an unarmed Logi variant as well as some armed ones. This APC is really fun to drive. It's quick in both forward and reverse, it can make tight turns, it has great driver visibility, and not only can use the usual drive smoke, but drivers can also launch 40mm defensive smoke grenades to protect any infantry that's trying to dismount or mount back up. The Logi variant can fit 2,000 supply, and since it is an APC, you can also swap kits off it as well. Because it carries supply, it can only fit 5 people, including the driver and commander, and the command hatch has about 260 degrees of visibility to the front of the vehicle. In addition to this unarmed variant, we also have 2 armed ones. These hold 600 ammo each and can fit about a dozen players. But not only do we have this usual open top 50 cal variant, but we also have one of these M113s with the Mk19 grenade launcher. This open top grenade machine gun can fire 48 40mm high explosive dual purpose rounds, has 10 boxes of this ammo, and is ranged to 300 meters. It looks good, it sounds good, and man, do these animations look incredible. The devs really put a lot of work into making it, and it shows, and I'm sure this is going to be a fan favorite for players who do like to run around with mechanized infantry squads. Now, the last M113A3 variant is actually the M1064A3 Mortar carrier. This APC carries a 120mm mortar that can fire 30 high explosive impact rounds, 15 high explosive near surface rounds, and 15 smoke rounds. On top of that, since this is a modernized mortar carrier, you don't have to do any more guesswork when you're trying to hit your targets. This vehicle has a built-in mortar calculator for the gunner on the left side of the screen, showing you the exact barrel elevation, range, approximate deviation of the shots when they land, and even the time to impact. And this timer will restart every time you send a shot downrange. And yes, if you're wondering if you were actually seeing this correctly, if you face the mortar tube out the rear of the vehicle, you'll have much lower elevation, allowing you to hit targets at over 3,600 meters away. I also didn't believe this when I first saw it, and I drove all the way to the bottom of Jensen's range in order to fire it at max range to the other side of the map. I fired it respawned at the northern deployment point, and it works. Americans now have a precision mortar strike that can do near pinpoint indirect fire, and you'll never ever see them. Additionally, you might have caught it at the beginning, but the mortar can fire high explosive near surface rounds, better known as airburst rounds. These are insanely deadly, and with a quick firing tube, pinpoint accuracy, and 15 rounds that can be fired without even reloading, infantry can be completely deleted in a matter of seconds. I absolutely love indirect fire, I love working with a team, and this mortar carrier checks all the boxes. But do remember that it's still just an APC. It does have a mounted 50 cal to protect itself if need be, but this thing will get absolutely shredded by both handheld AT and vehicles, so take advantage of its range and keep it far behind the front line. To help round out the light vehicles, the US and USMC will also have access to these Mk19 grenade machine guns mounted on the Humvees and MRAPs, while the USMC will have exclusive access to the RIB boat with the Mk19 as well. For the last of the American vehicles, we'll also be able to use a new Bradley variant, the M7A3 Bradley Fire Support Team, or BFIST. The M7A3 is a recon variant of the Bradley that replaces the tow launcher with an advanced optic and sensor pod. Everything else about the Bradley is the same. You have the AP and HE 25mm rounds, you have a coax machine gun, smoke launchers, you can transport troops. It's the Bradley you're used to, but just without the ATGM. Now, through my testing, it doesn't seem like the sensor pod actually does anything just yet, but this might be a hint at a future update where recon squads can use the sensor to laze and designate targets for either indirect fire or maybe some commander abilities. In the real world, these systems are used quite frequently with air assets, so maybe we'll have another update soon that will allow us to use this Bradley to its fullest potential, but for right now, just play with it as you would a LAV 25 or LAV 6. Now, if you'd like to use any of these new vehicles, you'll have to vote for their new units. The 37th Armored Regiment, 3rd Armored Division will use the 3 M113A3s as Lodgies, 2 50 cal ones as APCs, and has 2 of the new BFIST Bradleys and 2 Abrams. The 1st Cav Regiment will now be the US Army's mechanized unit with 3 M113 Lodgies, 2 M113 50 cal APCs, 2 M113 Mk19 APCs, and 2 of the new mortar carriers with 1 BFIST Bradley and 2 of the regular M2A3 Bradleys. With an Abrams as well, 1st Cav is an incredibly powerful unit relying heavily on these vehicles working together with infantry. However, one downside is that FOBs will no longer have access to emplaced mortars, and you'll instead have to work with your mortar carriers for that indirect fire. Lastly, the US Army will also have the 497th Combat Sustainment Support Battalion, which will have plenty of Lodgies supported by Mk19 MRAPs and 2 mortar carriers. As this is a support unit, you'll still have access to enemy intelligence, have extra HABs and ATGMs, and can still build emplaced mortars, making it a great unit for the more defensive-minded players. For Canada, the TAPV has been upgraded to include its authentic weapon systems. The C16 automatic grenade launcher with 45 40mm rounds, as well as a C6 machine gun. This dual turret remote weapon system will now be the only TAPV variant in game. And although the Mk19 is currently modeled, it is a placeholder for what will eventually be the appropriate German C16 model. If you still want to use quick and mobile mounted 50 cals, the LUVs are available, but do say goodbye to the 50 cal Crows TAPVs. Moving on to the Turkish land forces, the Turks will also have access to these new M113A3s, as well as the Black Hawk helicopter, reskinned with the Turkish camo and putting PKM machine guns in the doors. Now, this isn't replacing the UH-1H the faction already has, but instead it's supplementing it, with the new Land Forces Logistics Command Battle Group allowing you to choose both helicopters as well as the new mortar carriers. And the Turks have had a bit of a uniform overhaul, making the whole thing look a bit more realistic, so do let me know what y'all think. Finally, all NATO factions will now also have this Mk19 automatic grenade launcher as a deployable you can place on FOBs. The only restrictions are that you have to be the air assault or light infantry units, but you will now be able to actually have an emplaced grenade launcher for the Aussies, British, Canadians, Turks, US Army, and USMC. Now, just like the TAPV, however, the Mk19 is a placeholder for the German GMG automatic GL that will be added at a future date for both the British and Canadians. The devs have stated that they also plan to add additional types of automatic grenade launchers for the other factions in the future, so maybe we'll be getting some Russian variants soon as well. Speaking of the Russians, we now have some exciting news for players who wanted more modernized equipment, starting off with the BMP2M. This is a modernized BMP2 with caged armor on the sides, a GPD-30 automatic grenade launcher, and a quadruple cornet which replaces the BMP2's Conquer's ATGM. The BMP2M is insanely powerful, and the amount of damage you can cause to both vehicles and infantry is staggering. Gunners will have their usual 30mm autocannon, but the grenade launcher not only has 300 grenades for you to shoot, but the rate of fire is just shocking. Any infantry nearby will absolutely be melted in front of this thing. For anti-vehicle combat, the 2M's quad cornet launcher fires as quick as you want it to, allowing you to impact your target and then immediately have one sent to follow up. Now, since it is already loaded in these 4 tubes, this also allows you to quickly swap from the main gun to the ATGMs almost immediately. It's a huge upgrade to Russian armor, and vehicle players should absolutely love this. The Russian ground forces will also be getting the BMP-3M. This modernized BMP has the double-barreled 30mm autocannon and 100mm cannon, as well as a coax machine gun and Bastion ATGMs. The vehicle can fit a full squad, and as a driver, it feels very similar to the VDV's BMDs. It's quick, it's very maneuverable for a tracked vehicle, and just like the other BMPs, it's amphibious and drivers can use defensive drive smoke. As a gunner, this is your sight. You have a 3-stage zoom with this top horizontal line indicating your 30mm cannon at 400 meters, ranging all the way down to 2,000 meters in the center. The left side is for your machine gun, and the right side for your 100mm rounds. The vehicle itself does not actually start with anything loaded into the 100mm cannon, so if you do want to make sure you can quickly swap between the two, first load a frag round to prep it, and then use the 30mm autocannon. This will allow you to keep firing 30mm until you need to quickly change as needed without any downtime. This will also work with the Bastion ATGM. You can pre-prep this by having it loaded into the cannon, then swapping to your 30mm and just using it as you needed. Do note, however, the Bastion is fired out of this 100mm cannon, which you would load your frag rounds in. So if you did have a frag round loaded, you'll have to unload it to load the Bastion, and then you can hot swap between both cannons. To aim the Bastion, use the chevron on the optic, and it does have the usual ATGM reload time, so do make sure to either hit your shots or at least fire and move while you're getting a new one in the tube. The BMP-1AM is also being added, and although it isn't as impressive as the BMP-2M and the BMP-3M, it is a nice way to round out the Russian IFVs. It has the same 30mm autocannon you're familiar with if you use the BTR-82s, so your AP and HE, as well as a coax machine gun and defensive smoke launchers. Finally, the piece de resistance is the T-90A. Although their red eyes aren't actually red in game, the tank itself looks incredible. Obviously, it has a very T-72 feel to it, but one look at that modernized turret and it's very obviously a T-90. The patch notes do specify that this tank has upgraded frontal and side hull armor, as well as better frontal turret armor, but that's about all that's different from the T-72B3. It is planned to have it be differentiated further from the T-72 in the future, but just like the M7A3 Bradley fire support team, maybe we're just going to have to wait and see. Either way, I'm super excited to see this in game, and as a whole, the Russian vehicles are looking extremely fun to play. If you do want to play with these, you need to check out the new mechanized unit, the 205th Separate Motor Rifle Brigade, which will let you play with both the BMP-2M and BMP-3M, whereas the T-90A is actually going to be replacing the T-72s in most of the other units. For example, the 49th Combined Arms Army will now have one T-90A instead of a T-72B3, while the 6th Separate Chestolcheva Tank Brigade will have one T-90A and one T-72. Unless I missed it, it doesn't look like there are any units with two T-90s. You either get one or one in a T-72, but do keep an eye out if that changes in the future. Finally, the last vehicle being added to the game is the Insurgent and Irregular Militia ATGM Techie. This will be on the faction's light infantry and motorized units, and for the very first time will allow unconventional factions to have access to ATGMs. These trucks carry 6 rounds and can only fire at about a 90-degree angle out the back of the truck, but this is a huge force multiplier for these factions and should be absolutely deadly on the typical invasion layers. Now, if you have been paying attention throughout all this, you might have noticed that something looks a little different when I've been firing these ATGMs. In Squad V8.0, we're also going to be getting the ATGM Overhaul, which will completely rework these weapons. Depending on the actual ATGM you use, you will now notice they have different strengths and weaknesses. In the past, it didn't really matter if you used the wire-guided tow or the beam-riding cornet. Both fired the same, and you could not only accurately hit stationary and moving targets, but you could whip these things around to snipe helicopters. Now, as much fun as this is, as much fun as I like doing it, it's not really realistic. In V8.0, wire-guided missiles will actually have a wire to guide it, making it easier to hit moving targets, but they can't be fired on the move themselves and are less accurate at longer ranges. Beam riding missiles have great long-range accuracy, can be fired on the move, but are a bit harder to hit moving targets and are vulnerable to IR smoke countermeasures. Yes, 40mm defensive smoke countermeasures on vehicles now have their proper IR properties. And not only has the defensive smoke range increased from 50 meters to give better concealment, these IR smokes will disrupt all beam riding ATGMs. This means you can no longer use a cornet to accurately hit vehicles that have smoked. Instead, the missile will lose tracking and most likely spiral into the ground or up into the air. Now, this is only for the defensive smoke launchers, while the typical drive smoke that drivers can deploy will not disrupt the beam at all. If you are unsure what type of ATGM you are using, you can double check in the bottom right of the screen near the ammo. But here is the current arsenal in squad. The TOW Conquer's HJ73C, AT3 Malyutka, HJ8, and F2 Milan are all wire-guided, while the Cornet, Bastion, and Reflex are all beam riding. And when you do fire them, you can definitely tell that these have very, very different flight characteristics. Wire-guided missiles move while in flight quite a bit, and you can see the physical wire. Once the missile does impact, the wire will fall down and you can reload. However, this is an actual wire, meaning that you can snap it. If you try to whip this around objects or it gets clipped by something, the edges of your screen will get red and you'll hear a snapping sound while the missile will now spiral uncontrollably until it impacts somewhere. This is so cool, and it should really raise the skill ceiling on ATGMs immensely, but do be prepared to hear plenty of wire-snapped, wasted ATGM callouts in squads now. And although I did check to see if this snaps on things like vehicles, I wasn't able to check if this actually snaps on people too, or maybe it even kills a player. So if y'all do try this out, come back to me and report what happens. I'm super interested. Now, beam riding missiles are far more accurate at long ranges, but you will quickly lose your target if you move fast. A red circle will now start from the outside of your screen and get smaller as you get closer to the target, indicating the missile's effective range. If you fire off into nothingness or lose track of the beam because you're moving too quickly, the edges of your screen will now turn yellow, indicating the missile is in flight, but you're not controlling it. Small adjustments allow you to reacquire that target, but if you move too fast, you'll just lose it completely. This also means that you can't fire around objects anymore, as you'll no longer have visual sight on the target in order to designate the beam. On top of this, although you can't see it, I've been told that the ATGM effective range is now closer to 2,500 meters. Although this is a huge range, it is going to be pretty difficult to actually hit moving targets, so don't worry too much if you're a helicopter or a vehicle on the move, but instead, vehicle players should probably not just be stationary for too long. This ATGM overhaul is incredibly cool, and the devs have also specified that these changes are currently on the conservative side. While they may have a bit more of a drastic change in the future to make them less of an anti-aircraft weapon to, quote-unquote, open the door for more dedicated anti-air weapons in the future. Now, I'm not saying Stingers and Iglas are confirmed, but it's as close as you can get to OWI saying that we'll be getting handheld man-pads to shoot down choppers in a future update. I love the ATGMs, but man, I want some man-pads, so this is awesome. Now, to wrap up the update, the VDV will also now have the RGO Impact Grenade as their standard frag grenade. It appears that after 15 meters, the grenade will swap to impact mode and instantly explode, but if it's thrown within 15 meters or accidentally dropped, it'll act like just a normal grenade with a small timer before it explodes. This is a really cool addition and will be absolutely devastating at clearing buildings and habs. Bullpups have also gotten a pass to improve their gunplay. The Aussie EF88, British L85A2, and Chinese QBZ 95-1 have all improved weapon handling with regards to sway, and I found this most notable in the L85 with the SUSAT optic. It's so much easier to tap fire semi-auto and keep a sight picture with or without stamina, and it makes for a much better overall experience. Additionally, the Canadian C79A2 optic has finally been adjusted to having a 100 meter zero. In the real world, all of these optics are 0 to 200 meters, which we've had in game since the faction was released, but it was strangely the only infantry rifle optic that wasn't ranged to 100 meters. This made swapping from the One Piece 7.8 or the ACOG to the C79A2 very disorienting, and if you were like me, you'd frequently miss headshots due to this ranging. Now, everything is standardized, and no matter the faction, you'll be using a rifle 0 to 100 meters. The last major change to gameplay is that heavy anti-tank availability is now dependent on the unit you're playing as. All factions except the Turks will still have their usual 2 hats per team, but for the conventional factions, your light infantry and air assault units will now have 4 hats per team to make up for their lack of vehicles. Now you can still only have 1 hat per squad, but the hats have been doubled, which is going to be a huge buff to these units. And additionally, if you have air assault on the Turkish faction, you will finally be able to have a hat kit with the Carl Gustav. This is a great change to all of those factions and units and should make them selected a lot more often during voting. For vehicle players, vehicle reset times have been improved to help flip or rotate vehicles quicker in case you get them stuck. And if you're a helicopter pilot, do be aware that all choppers have been removed from the armored units except for the VDV. There's a few smaller changes here and there, so I've linked the updated 8.0 unit template down in the description below so you can really flip through and check it out for yourself. Finally, there's some other game server and map changes, such as improved loading screens, new voting parameters allowing admins to allow players to vote for a map, but not choose the unit and instead randomize the unit, as well as some other quality of life updates, including a few new map layers. And of course, this update will come with some more cosmetics, 2 for the VDV and 1 for the USMC. The AK-12 Nettle Woodland Camo, as well as the SV98 Horizon Camo, and the M16A4 Mirage Woodland Camo. Although we covered the vast majority of the patch notes below, if you do want to see each and every small change, do check out the full post in the link down below. But that's about it for Squad V8.0. Are you excited for the new vehicles? Maybe you want to try your hand at the new ATGMs, or maybe you're just happy to know that you'll finally be able to hit your shots with the Canadian rifle. Let me know down in the comments below, and if you liked the video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more. But that's it for me. Until next time, peace.